Hi, guys. We're here again. So, oh, I see Scott H. graced me with his presence again. We haven't talked in a long time. So, we've been going through this Stephen Smith stuff. I don't know if you all have been following, okay? But the more that I look into this, the worse that it gets in terms of confusion and uh, information that conflicts with other things, and it's coming from everywhere. Okay, I was reading Sandy's letter today that she wrote to the FBI in 2016 about Stephen's death, and a couple things bothered me. I'll tell you right off the bat 2 things that bothered me. Um, One was we're referring to Randy, as Solicitor Murdahl, and Solicitor Murdahl is Old Man Murdahl, right? We talked about that, like, super briefly here last night. So there was a little bit of confusion as far as that goes. And then I remembered seeing a Facebook post by Sandy saying something to the effect of, and we won't show it, it's not necessary, but something to the effect of, "You guys are the ones that are bringing up the Murdals. I never said anything about that. We're not saying anything about Buster." And I was like, "That's very strange," because there's a whole letter to the FBI where there are heavy accusations made in this letter. And the more that I'm looking through things, the more I am concerned if these things were ever looked into. Now, I know how small town rumors happen, okay? But as I said before, if we're going to take if we're going to take certain people's names being mentioned, then we should be taking all of them in, right? No matter who it is. So, I'm going to share this letter just in case anybody hasn't read it, and we're going to read it out loud. And I'm of the impression that she's talking about Randy, Alex's brother, in this letter. I'm just curious, how many people have read this letter? Oh, you haven't read it either. Good. It's a heavy letter. It's got a lot of things. So let's share here. Hard to tell what I might share, just so you all know, because I don't do this. My fingers are crossed. We can see the letter, right? Am I safe? Lord, I hope it's the letter. Oh, good. At least some people haven't read it. Okay. Can you see it? You can see it. Okay. So, Sandy Smith, who is Stephen Smith's mother, wrote this letter September 28th, 2016. She wrote it to the FBI, and she was asking for some help. So let's go ahead and read this, and then we'll then we'll get on to a couple other things. So she sends it to FBI headquarters. "Dear Sir or Madam, My family is in desperate need of your help. My 19-year-old son, Stephen Nicholas Smith, was murdered on July 8th, 2015, in Hampton County, South Carolina. It has been apparent from the first week of this investigation that authorities are covering up critical evidence, and we no longer know who to trust. Stephen's father, my ex husband, who is now deceased, and I were first told that our son was shot to death after running out of gas in the early hours of the morning and exiting his vehicle. Later that day, we were told it was a hit and run. Finally, investigators determined he was beaten to death. He was attacked so violently that the entire side of his face was rebuilt with putty for his funeral. Hampton investigators asked us at that time to continue to publicly say it was a hit and run. They claimed they didn't want the killer to know they were looking for him. There have been no named suspects. Now, I haven't seen anywhere where anyone said that Stephen had been beat to death. So I would be curious to know where that information came from and who would have told her that. The first call my family received after the murder was from authorities notifying us of Stephen's death. The second came very quickly the same morning from solicitor Randolph Murdahl. In fact, he called my ex husband's cell phone as we waited in the police station for a positive identification. He said he heard of the case and was interested in working pro bono as a liaison between the family and investigators. Stephen's father accepted the offer, although we were unsure why Mr. Murdahl wanted to help us. We also weren't sure how he found out so quickly, even before it was confirmed to be our son. Surprisingly, after just a few interactions, Mr. Murdahl stopped returning our calls. Within days of our son's death, Stevens just gets even, you know, within days of our son's death, Stephen's twin sister Stephanie was approached multiple times by peers, telling her that Solicitor Murdahl's nephews were responsible. As a family, it was suspicious to us since he had taken such an immediate interest in the case and then became unreachable so quickly. These suspicions reached new heights weeks later when Stephen's oldest brother, Chris, was approached at work by a young man he did not know. This person told Chris he was present when Stephen was murdered and witnessed everything firsthand. He said that Solicitor Murdahl's nephew, Buster Murdahl, who graduated with Stephen, beat Stephen to death with a baseball bat. He claimed it was because Stephen was gay. Stephen was, in fact, gay. The witness said they were out smashing mailboxes when they came upon Stephen, and Buster seized the opportunity. The young man told Chris that Buster threatened to kill him if he ever spoke up. This information was given to investigators, but nothing has come of it. So I have to ask, you have this person who's coming to a family member as themselves in person and saying that they were present and witnessed a murder. Who followed up on this? Even if it's a rumor, even if it's a rumor, which I don't know who would tell a rumor about themselves. Um, it could have been someone that was not really sure what they were saying, maybe, but that would be investigators' job is to go check on that and see if there's any truth to it, right? So she goes on to say, in reviewing a copy of the 911 dispatch log, which I have enclosed, tab A, page 2, I found that the first responding officer, Michael Bridges, arrived on the scene within a minute of 911's dispatch, even though in the Hampton County Sheriff's Office incident report, tab B, he claimed to have driven around for a while trying to find my son's body. The second officer, Jason Eubanks, arrived within 2 minutes. This is suspicious to me because the area where my son was placed is extremely rural. Cops do not patrol that area frequently, and it's not likely an officer, much less two, would coincidentally be patrolling there prior to 5 a.m. They had to be in that area at that time for a reason. I suspect they were there because they already knew Stephen was there, and I suspect the Murdals were the ones who told them. The Murdals are probably the most prominent family in Hampton County. Stephen had, on more than one occasion, mentioned to friends and his twin sister that he was involved romantically with someone from a prominent family in the county who was hiding his sexuality. He said that it would shock people to know this person was gay. We suspect this could be the young man Stephen was referring to, though he never named him. At the beginning of the investigation, officers told us they would not have access to Stephen's text messages for approximately a year. They claimed they would have to send the phone to Apple to override the security features. We found out months later the phone had never been sent to Apple. Often investigators claimed it was uncertain which department had the phone. They have since produced the phone, which they still have not sent to Apple, but still claim they cannot access it. We feared then and still fear now that they have and will continue to delete critical information from the phone. It has already been over a year, and we have no knowledge of who Stephen interacted with by phone call or text prior to his murder. Since the murder, Buster has gotten rid of his old vehicle, which is critical because, according to the witness who approached Chris, they were traveling in Buster's old vehicle that night. It's also critical because Stephen was found 3 miles from his vehicle in the morning on the morning of his murder. There was no blood splatter at the crime scene despite his brutal beating, which makes it clear he was transported to that site. We believe there is DNA in Buster's old vehicle. I think it's important to note that Stephen's wallet was found in his own vehicle and his gas cap was open, further suggesting he did not leave willingly. Tab C. Stephen was very skittish and would never have walked down the road in the dark, and it's not likely he would have opened his car door to accept assistance from someone he did not know, especially alone on a dark country road. He was even known to walk through the woods during the day to stay out of sight. His autopsy shows his toxicology reports were negative for drugs and alcohol, so I have no reason to believe he would have done something so completely out of character. Since Stephen was placed on the highway, it became a highway patrol investigation. We thought this was beneficial to Stephen since local authorities obviously have their own agenda. However, this did not help our case at all. This case was mysteriously bounced from investigator to investigator without reasons or notification. It would repeatedly get to a certain point, then the assigned investigators would bow out, perhaps not wanting to take on Solicitor Murdaugh. I was approached in September 2015 by a gentleman claiming to know about a criminal case decades ago that was swept under a rug to protect a different member of the Murdaugh family. This came as no surprise to me. I see history repeating itself with my son. No one here is trying to solve our case. Therefore, I contacted Governor Nikki Haley that same month with a plea for help. I wrote her a letter telling her basically word for word the story I've just explained to you. She responded promptly and assigned the case to new investigators. While it appeared to be the answer to our prayers, very little progress has been made, and they say they have exhausted their leads. I cannot fathom how that is possible. Our concerns regarding Solicitor Murdaugh and his family have not been investigated despite witness accounts, which include an alleged conversation between a schoolmate of Buster's little brother Paul and school officials. I was told he claimed to have knowledge of the murder and implicated Buster as the murderer. Those school officials were said to have discussed the statement with the student's family, not police. We have heard no further follow up to this situation. Interestingly, according to my source, Paul was transferred from that school to a private school after the alleged statement. We believe Solicitor Murdaugh's influence extends to the pathologist, Dr. Aaron Presnell of MUSC, who performed Stephen's autopsy, tab D. Though Deputy Coroner Kelly Green and SLED agent Brittany Burke, who were both present for the autopsy, have gone on the record to state that neither made any mention of the car striking Stephen, Dr. Presnell ruled his death a hit and run. She was combative with the Highway Department investigator, Todd Proctor, regarding her findings when he pointed out that the only trauma was to Stephen's head. He asked how she came to that conclusion, and she said it was because he was found in the road. That alone was her reason. She insisted hit and run despite the fact that neither his injuries nor the crime scene support that finding. The coroner disagrees with her determination, and it is documented multiple times in this case file that there were no skid marks or vehicle debris consistent with a hit and run at the crime scene. Dr. Presnell herself confirmed to investigator Proctor that she found no glass or other fragments on the body to suggest a hit and run. It is simply not possible that a vehicle struck solely his head. Coroner Ernie Washington informed investigator Proctor that Dr. Presnell told him she would, quote, change her report to read however he wanted it. Copies of investigator Proctor's summary notes, which document his discussions with Dr. Presnell and Coroner Washington, are enclosed. We desperately need your help. This investigation is being deliberately derailed. We need someone to hold the investigators accountable and access Stephen's phone. Solicitor Murdahl is widely known, and it appears this is playing to his advantage. We need someone who doesn't care about his family name to take this case seriously. In July 2016, I wrote to Attorney General Loretta Lynch in the hopes that she could and would help us, but there's been no response. I have enclosed the key documents I mentioned above, but I can provide copies of all the case documents I have at your request. We also have new information which we discovered in the past few weeks that we feel is critical to this case. However, I no longer trust the investigators here. I am holding it as I await your response. And then we don't need to see her phone numbers. So, a couple things here. I haven't been able to see what you all were saying. It is alarming. It is. I was thinking that same thing and, like, reading it again out loud. It's it's alarming. Um, and it also kinda explains, like, where all of this came from, where all of these like, the bat thing and all that, like, that's not necessarily I mean, apart from the one part in the case notes where the investigator says, um, that he asked the doctor if it was possible that that could have been what happened. Um, so one of the things that we were talking about before we came in here was if I was walking on the 2 lane where there's no street lights, really any house lights, there's no way in hell that I'm walking without the light on my phone. So I'm curious how Stephen walked 3 miles with no light because his phone was in his back pocket, secured, like, with the Velcro fastened. So what was he using for light to walk all that way? Or was he walking with somebody else? Or was he not walking at all? I don't know. But I find it hard to believe that whether he was walking so his family said that he usually walked through the woods as opposed to the road, or he was walking on the road, he would need a light to see. Not just for, like, critters and stuff, but I mean for, like, to walk, to see the road. And this could be true. One of the things that kind of startled me, not startled me, but surprised me was when his sister was in her interview and she said that he had only driven this car like 5 times, this yellow car. And if you listen to the boyfriend's interviews, he also says that he makes a comment like, if he was driving that yellow car like they say he was driving, then he's been back here before, like, and what he was referring to was the back of the trailer park. There's, like, several trailers where he lives, and there's houses behind his, um, saying that he's seen the yellow car go back there before. Well, according to Steven's twin sister, he she was driving the car before he was. He was driving, like, an SUV of some type, and that includes, like, the 4th of July when he saw him last, which was the weekend before. So, like, the 4 days before. So, I don't know how many times he drove the yellow car, but there's many there's many questions. There's even something as simple as, what was he doing that night? His sister said that she knows for a fact that he went to school that day. The iPad that he had, its last location was at school, not, like, with him. She met him at the gas station. He went to go get cigarettes for his dad at the Exxon by their house at, like, 5 or 5:30, and he couldn't get the car to start. So he called her, and she went to go meet him at the Exxon and realized that the terminals on the battery were loose. They had been knocked loose. And also interesting about that is that when the boyfriend was interviewed, he said that people had been messing with him, with Steven, and messing with the lug nuts on his car and the battery terminals. So she goes to the Exxon. She really quickly figures out that I mean, it had to have been very quickly because she figures out that it's the battery terminals, tightens up the terminals, and then they drive home. He jumps in the shower and he leaves by 6 o'clock. So, like, within a 30-minute period, he calls for help. She goes, she realizes that the terminals are loose, which that's only happened to me one time. And it was not something that I would have thought to check. Like, it's not, I wonder what made her think that that was maybe what it was, unless that was something that continuously happened, like the boyfriend said, is that they were messing with the terminals on the battery. Fixed it, went home, showered, and left in 30 minutes. Didn't say where he was going, just left. And then he was found the following morning, early in the morning at 4 a.m. Um, but his boyfriend said that he was going swimming at, what was it called? I want to say, I keep wanting to say like Bulldog Landing, but that's not what it is. Something with a B. And who was he swimming with? Bobcat. It's Bobcat Landing. So he was swimming at Bobcat Landing, but like with who? There's no, other than the boyfriend having said that that Steven was supposed to be on his way to his house. There's no, like, anybody saying who was with him that night. So, and in reading the notes, I don't even see where they found that information out and, like, went to talk to those people. If you think about the timing, yeah. So, sand on the bottom of his shoe, that's exactly what I was thinking was, okay, the sand makes sense. If he was swimming at Bobcat Landing, I'm sure that there's sand there. I wonder if he had walked those 3 miles, or did he go swimming, get in the car, throw the shoes, like, in the forward or in the trunk, on the seat of the passenger seat, I don't know, and drive until he got to where he was, and then he was like, "Shit, we're out of gas. I'm out of gas. Now I gotta get out and put my shoes on." 'Cause he walked 3 miles in the dark, but we have his best friend, Rachel, who spoke to investigators and said that she had been texting Steven that night. We leaves the house at 6. She had texted with Steven that night between 7 and 8, and that was the last time she talked to him, and she had no other information. That's what's written in the notes. So, I think that's interesting, right? I mean, your best friend my best friend doesn't even, like, live here, and my best friend, if she was God forbid, like, something happened to me and my best friend was called by investigators, there would be more she'd have to say, whether she had spoken to me or not. So, that was between 7 and 8. Now, what's interesting is that Steven's boyfriend said that the last time that he spoke to him, the last text was at 3:37, okay? He also mentions that he had spoken to Steven on the phone, and when he spoke to Steven on the phone, he sounded like he was walking, he could, like, hear cars or whatever, and he's like, "Are you walking?" And Steven's like, "No." And then the call dropped. Either it dropped or he hung up on him, and when they say, like, "When was that?" He said, "The last text at 3:37." He says, "I don't know. You'd have to check the phone. You'd have to get the phone logs and the text logs." But if I remember correctly, it was 3:37. That's a very specific time, I feel like, and he said that he had looked it up. Now keep in mind, this is this is the 14th of July, so this is over a week after he died. So there was plenty of time to look. The 911 call of him laying in the middle of the road was at 3:57, 20 minutes later, exactly. Unless he ran, he didn't walk 3 miles in 20 minutes to have been on the phone and started walking. Like, when did he park his car? Like, when did he pull off the side of the road and park his car? And what bothers me about this is if he ran out of gas and every other time prior to this, he called his sister, his dad, somebody in his family to come bring him gas, why didn't he call for them to bring him gas this time or send a text? And I'm aware that it was late at night, but, like, you would think you would try before you'd walk 7 some odd miles. He had several friends. His sister named multiple friends and made it seem like nobody really was that to where they would know very much about what he was doing or where he was going. One of the things was he became really secretive 2 weeks before he died. Okay. But then when asked, what about him was, like, secretive? Why was he acting strange? Like, in what way was he acting strange? His sister said that he was coming home late, and when she clarified a little bit further, she said, "Monday." So he was found Wednesday morning, Sunday night into Monday morning at, like, 2. She says it was 2 AM. He came home at 2 AM. That was the first day that he, like, came back late. So to me, it's that was only a couple days, right? Not 2 weeks, it was just a couple days, and his mom was telling the story that she was there. He was there with her and left at, like, 1 AM. So, he might have came home late, but he was coming from mom's, and in fact, one of the reasons that mom gives as to why she thought he was being weird in the couple weeks following or coming up to his death was that he was coming over all the time. And she's like, he was coming over all the time and staying hours and hours and hours, and he wasn't studying like he used to, and I found out he wasn't going to class. And he only had class 2 days a week, Tuesdays and Thursdays. So, I mean, that's barely class, right? And it was only for like a couple of hours. So it's like I guess I'm just trying to I mean, did he was he still going to school? It's weird, but I do know some people that do that. I wouldn't be too surprised at that, but that's a good point. But, okay, to that effect, he went swimming. Did he have swim trunks? Did he swim na naked? He couldn't have swam in his clothes, right? Because he wasn't, like, soaking wet. Was there a towel in the car? Was there a bathing suit in the car? We know that his wallet was in the car. I personally find it interesting that it was tucked in between the passenger door and the passenger side seat. I've said before that I've seen guys, like, take a wallet out of that back pocket and shove it in that spot. I know some people, their opinion is that maybe he, like, took a turn really fast and it toppled over and spilled into the floor, his wallet. Did he look for his wallet? Did he think it was already in his pocket? He couldn't have been going for gas because he didn't bring his wallet. So he could have started to walk towards the boyfriend's house, which is the direction he was going. He was closer to his boyfriend's house than he was to his house. So 3:30 in the morning, 3:30 in the morning, you were out doing whatever. If you and your boyfriend are on good terms, he's awake. When you last spoke to him, you said that you were almost there. Why wouldn't you just walk there? But the question is still, who else was there? Who'd he go swimming with? I don't believe he walked either. I also don't believe though that he like was I know a lot of people think he was killed somewhere else and then, like, dumped there. There just was so much there was just so much blood. I can't it would have to be, like, really close. And there was no, like, trail as if he had been carried as far as we know. But at the same time, I'm looking at, like, his clothes and stuff today, and I'm like, "How did he get smears of what looks like blood on the front of his shorts?" And it's, like, thumbprinted. It's like smeared. It's not like a drop that fell on there and then kinda, like, circled out a little bit more. It's irregular. It's irregularly shaped, and I just wonder it almost looks like somebody wiped their hand. We don't know if the fuel tank was empty. In my opinion, if I was trying to convince whoever was gonna find the car that he had ran out of gas, I would just siphon the gas. The fuel tank cap was off, so they didn't get footprints from around the car. Someone could very well have siphoned the gas out to make it look like he had run out of gas. They never said if he did run out of gas. So I feel like that's something that should be in there. He likely ran out of gas because when we took it to wherever, it had no gas. I wouldn't open the gas cap. I wouldn't see any reason to. I also am curious. I don't see anywhere where it was documented that one of the door handles on the car is gone. The driver's door handle is gone. Was it always gone? Did someone break it off because their hand had been on it? I don't know. I don't know. And his sister even said, like, I don't know why he would have run out of gas because when he went to get my dad cigarettes, my dad said, like, basically fill up the tank. And she said it would take like $25, which he likely wouldn't do because he didn't want to spend dad's money. So he'd probably put like $15 in it, which was more than enough. So why did he run out of gas? And then boyfriend says that he had just given him like $150 gas card to get gas on the 3rd. So just seems weird. Like I said, even if he ran out of gas, my whole thing is he's not a cat. So how the hell did he see the whole walk? There's some other things here. One of the things, well, there's many things. Like I know we we talked about this, not for nothing. Perry Singleton was the lead investigator. He was also the only person that said that Stephen was wearing a white polo shirt, and he's also now deceased. So, who and how are they gonna reconcile why he said that? That's like a really big mistake. It's a bizarre mistake. Not just a white shirt, but a white polo shirt. Implies you got, like, right up on top of him to be able to see exactly what he was wearing. Yeah, I know here that sometimes if the moon is bright enough and if the stars, because there's a lot of stars, obviously, but if they're bright enough, it looks like just after sunset, like, all night sometimes here, even with no lights. But all the other time, like, I can't even with my cell phone light, I can barely see to, like, walk out to my car well enough to be able to orient myself. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this is possible. I That was one of the first things when I saw that and I was like, "That's bizarre." Literally the whole you know what, matter of fact, maybe I can show you. I'm like, the whole door handle is gone. And I'm like, "Okay, so maybe it's gone on other doors, but it's not. It's only gone on the driver's door." Here's one. Let's see. Yeah, this too. Alright, we can see that. See what I mean? The whole the whole thing is gone. So, you gotta figure like, even if you put the key in there like, I mean, I can't zoom in any more than that, so I can't really tell. But if you put the key in there, how are you pulling the door open? Do you have to get in on the passenger side? Is that where the wallet got dropped? I mean, that's an oddity when you're trying to look for things that might not make sense, and so when we're talking about the car, we have an instance where Steven's mom is in a clip, an interview clip, and she says, "They kept the car for 6 months, and they must not have processed the car forensically because when I got the car back, I found a gate pass to a place in Hilton Head." She said they had it for 6 months and didn't process it. But there was an interview with a man named David, whose name was on the gate pass, and Steven's mom saw his name on the gate pass and was like, "I'm gonna call this person. I'm gonna get a hold of this person, and I'm gonna find out if they know what happened to my son." And so she reached out to this person, and she says, "My son was found killed, and in his vehicle was a gate pass to your house." And this man says, that he responded to an ad that Steven had put on Craigslist. And his 18-year-old daughter wasn't around that night, so he made plans with Steven for Steven to come out to his house. So he does, that's at 10:30, about 10:30, and they do whatever, and Steven leaves about 1, he says. This man David says he left about 1 AM on the 29th of June. And what's interesting about that is that Steven's boyfriend checks in on Facebook on Hilton Head on the 29th at 1:18 AM. Just keeping it in mind. Don't know what it means, I'm just pointing it out. So, the reason why this is interesting is because she said that I mean, there's many reasons, but she said that they kept the car for 6 months and that she opened it up and found this gate pass and this person, and she reached out to them, yada, yada, and then the police talked to him. But the police talked to him on August 28th, and he died on July 8th. So, it wasn't 8 months or 6 months. And he says in his interview that she had reached out to him after finding the gate pass to his house in Steven's car. Now, maybe she meant to say 6 weeks. That makes more sense. Hold on one sec. Okay. So I just don't understand. I don't understand many things, and I don't know that letter required a follow-up. So I don't know why that didn't happen. This is not the only way to get that. And what's interesting, if we're talking autopsy wise, I was listening to Joseph Scott Morgan the other day, and he made several points that were really good. And one of them was about his clothing. So he says, long story short, you get hit by a car, you usually get up under the car, and the car usually ends up bumping over top of you. The undercar is very dirty. So, generally, when that happens to someone, there'll be tears in the clothes. There will also be, um, dirt, a lot of dirt, oil, rips in the clothing, and there wasn't any of that as far as anybody could see. And typically, and here's the problem, and I said this to somebody who had another pathologist, like, read the report, and I was like, "I think what it boils down to is that anytime you ask pathologist to read an autopsy report, they really don't typically have a basis to argue with you because they haven't seen the body. They don't have any pictures or videos. They haven't seen the body, so they can't say that something is or isn't present, and they're only going off of your report. On top of that, I've seen doctors, like, fuck people up. Generally, when you if you have a surgery and somebody messes up your surgery and you go see another doctor to get it fixed, whatever it is that they messed up, that doctor's not gonna sit there if they're smart. They're not gonna sit there and talk badly about what that doctor did. They're gonna sit there and they're gonna explain to you how they can fix it if they can, but they're not gonna harp on what the other person did wrong. So, I think in general, having a pathologist review another pathologist's autopsy report, and all they have is the words and they don't have the pictures, which it does happen. So, obviously, the pathologist that was hired this time to do the private autopsy, obviously that person is going to use photos, videos, whatever's available above and beyond just that report to critique what was done. But they have all the information. But something to keep in mind with this one, when we're talking about like the findings and things like that, is A, the letter that we just read, B, the fact that the reason that they wanted to raise the money to do the private exhumation and autopsy is because they did not want so if SLED would have exhumed the body, then he would have gone back to MUSC, and they didn't want to do that. So they specifically didn't want his body to go back to MUSC. So and 3 or C, I don't remember if we were using letters or numbers, is in my sleuthing the other night, I come across other cases of that pathologist, and I'm here to tell you that anyone that won't say that it was entirely unprofessional and, like, unethical to have said to the coroner that she would change her report to read however he wanted it to is a liar, and it sounds bad because it is, and if you look into her history, you will find other cases where things similar happened, and on top of that, in the case notes, at one point it says, and I read this on somebody else's thing. He says, and this is Proctor that says this, and he's talking about pathologist and his conversation with the coroner. And he says the pathologist also states in the report that in light of historical information along with the autopsy, these conclusions were made. To what historical information she possessed, I am unaware. I attempted to speak with Dr. Presnell at an earlier date to go over information that had been discovered throughout the investigation, and that was ill that was ill received. So he went and spoke to the people that were there present during the autopsy, and those people said, "We didn't say nothing to her other than the fact that he was found in the road, that's it." So, I found another case where they found out that and the prosecutor was very upset. It was a case about a woman whose children had been murdered by her in a hot car, and the defense attorney for this woman, guess who it was? If you followed Stephen Smith at all, you'd know that Sandy, his mother, had a different attorney that was helping her before Eric Bland, who is her attorney now. And that attorney, he hired a private investigator who they like Sandy mainly only spoke to this private investigator. Okay. And didn't really have much conversation with this attorney. And the attorney was Andy Savage. And when it all came to a head, the reason that Andy Savage was fired as her attorney and trying to find out what happened to Steven was because the attorney, Andy Savage, and this private investigator, like, went to a news place and did an interview and said that, like, the accusations that had been made against the Murdaughs might have been unfounded because they had found whatever they'd spoken to people and, um, had people in mind that would have run them over. Anyway, long story short, she was annoyed by this and she fired him. Come to find out, I come across this lady's case, and the concern by the prosecutor was that the autopsy was garbage because they found out that the pathologist that performed the autopsy in this case on these children was taking outside information in order to make her findings, and not outside information from the investigators, which is who she would typically work with, right? But from this accused murderer's defense attorney, who was Andy Savage. So they were sitting there like, "We don't even know, if this is any good." Like, she made decisions on this autopsy that were based on what he was telling her, and it was Aaron Presnell. And their concern was that what was said to her was she was fed information that would change her report to make it to the point where when it comes down to sentencing, they would be lighter on this woman in sentencing. That is wrong. That is wrong. And I can't even say he shouldn't have did it. Well, he shouldn't have, but whatever. She should have been like, keep your opinions to yourself. I find what I find and I work with the investigators. You cannot be taking information from an attorney who's representing the person that they're saying murdered the people whose autopsies you're doing. That is absurd. So, you know, it's just way too connected and bizarre. And I don't care, SCHP, the Highway Patrol, they can get on any news station they want to, and they can say repeatedly that they always knew that Stephen was murdered and he was not run over by a car. Okay. But my issue with that is that SLED gathers evidence. So if we're going to compare it like to the Idaho case, you have SCHP or you have the Idaho State Police forensics that are coming in and they're processing the evidence, but they're not like necessarily working the case. Like they're not interviewing people. They're going in, they're gathering stuff, they're taking it to their lab to process, right? That's what SLED was doing. And they have the ability to investigate cases. And in fact, a majority of like if you go look at their press releases on SLED's website, most of them are law enforcement involved. So when they have to come in because a law enforcement officer somewhere is arrested for something and they need to investigate it. And obviously they investigated the stuff with the Murdaughs. So that's what they do. They came in and went to the autopsy and were told at the autopsy by the pathologist that Stephen was hit by a vehicle. And they don't investigate that. So it was assigned to the highway patrol. When SLED put out their press release after Paul and Maggie Murdaugh were killed, they said, "We are opening a case into the death of Stephen Smith. Not reopening, we're opening one." So when we finally got this, and keep in mind, they didn't even put out like a press release for that, which is bizarre because if they were opening the case, I don't know why they wouldn't announce that they were opening the case. But they put this one out in March where they say that they're investigating as a homicide, but they're not reopening anything. It had been open since 2021. And they make a comment about how back in 2015, the Hampton County Sheriff's Office and the Highway Patrol never reached out to them and requested that they work Stephen's case. So we're looking at notes where they're saying, "We don't think he was hit by a car. We don't understand why no one else will investigate this. It's not consistent with this. The Highway Patrol doesn't investigate murders." But no one reached out to SLED to tell them that it was a murder and that they needed to investigate. I mean, that's weird. Either it's weird or SLED is lying. Now, I see a lot of complaining in these case notes, but I don't see anywhere where um, one of the investigators is quoted somewhere saying that he like physically tried to hand them the case file to take it from him and they wouldn't do it. I don't see that. So I think this goes beyond just the autopsy or just the mess that it was where nobody knew who was taking over and whatnot. I think this is that this something got in the way, and I think it got in the way of who was being interviewed. I think it got in the way of what leads they were tracking down. I mean, something as simple as his phone. He was found with his phone in his back pocket on July the 8th of 2015, and a search warrant was never obtained asked for until, let's see here, January 25th, 2016. What on earth was the holdup? And in the search warrant, all they ask for is June 9th, 2015 to July 9th, 2015. So the month leading up to his death. They got all of that information back by January 26th, 2016, same day that they asked, 11:10 in the morning. So then in September, the end of September 2016, Sandy's still saying, "We don't even know who made the phone what phone calls or text messages were made to or from my son's phone. It hasn't been opened." Well, this would give you the phone calls at the very least for Steven. The other thing was the whole, "We can't get into it. We can't get into it." Mom thought that she was a secondary thumbprint. She wasn't. Wasn't she? Or, like, was it a different phone? So, nobody could get in, and then she says that in 2017, the FBI comes in, and they sign out the phone, and they take it to Quantico, and they unlock the phone, and then bring it back to South Carolina. And they say, "Here, we unlocked it." And they were willing to take Stephen's clothes for processing. Any evidence that was collected, they were willing to take for processing. This is after they got her letter. And because they weren't invited in to help, they couldn't. So again, my question is, we're sitting here complaining as the highway patrol that we need help, that he wasn't hit by a car, and that it needs to be investigated as a homicide. And we have the FBI here who done unlocked a phone 2 years after we found it. Why are we not inviting them in? If they're willing to, why are we not inviting them in? We can't complain about something and then, like, be offered a solution a couple times and turn it down every time. So, and what's bizarre about that is so we have the FBI saying that the phone's been open since 2017, right? And we have the sister in interviews saying that Stephen had no lock on his iPad. We have case notes in here, about them reviewing the breadcrumbs files, and they're going through all of the stuff that come from the iPad. They got it. They returned it to the family. What came of that? That iPad, they said he's had that iPad since he was in 11th grade, that if anything was gonna be helpful, it's gonna be the iPad. Well, that's great news because you say it doesn't have a lock, so now we don't have to fool around with the lock. It's 2015. We just found him dead, 14th, so not even 7 days later, 6 days later, we gather the iPad and we download it. So we should have a lot of information on from this iPad, and then we give it back to the family. Why then, so 2015, we have the tablet stuff, the iPad stuff. 2 years later, 2017, now we have the phone stuff. We have the phone and the iPad stuff. So why in 2023 now do we have the lawyer saying that SLED just cracked the phone and there's gonna be a lot of information on the phone? They just cracked it 8 years later, and they're still working on cracking the iPad. What? The iPad was already cracked 8 years ago. The information was already downloaded. I'm so confused. Is this another iPad? and another phone? I mean, the sister did say that dad bought him a phone, and he didn't give it back to dad because he wanted to let everyone know in his phone that he was getting a new phone, and it's the one that his boyfriend Mark bought him. So, that phone went missing. No one ever saw it again. Is it that phone? And we think that there's gonna be information on that phone? That would be great, but where has it been? I thought you found 1 phone on his body. Like, it doesn't take 8 years to find a phone. So, I'm just wondering what this is, and what is this iPad that they're still working on cracking? What iPad is that? They said they did that right after they found the kid. I don't know, man. I think that what it's gonna come down to here is that, and I said this yesterday, I think that some of the people that are scared to talk or were scared to talk before the trial was over, I think are gonna be people that were investigating this case. I think that's why they were scared. So, maybe I don't know, man. You all heard the letter. That is a damning that is a heavily loaded letter. We heard similar things about other people calling in and saying that their stepson said that they were driving with somebody else and somebody else hit him. And we're trying to be led to believe now that those 2 people are, like, persons of interest, we'll say. And maybe that's true because they all know each other, okay? Same same group in terms of going to school together, living right near each other, all that shit. So, if I'm to believe stepdad who called in because Randy Murdaugh told him to, why am I not to believe all of the other notes of people calling and texting each other and asking and saying and sending emails, anonymous emails about so and so being involved, and then this letter? Like, what is going on? And I'm sorry, but, like, for me, changing the let's say the cause and manner of death and offering a reward. Let's even say arresting people. Let's even say we're going as far as arresting people. For me, that's not enough because, like, how did we get there? How did it take this long? How did we get there? All of this stuff needs to be looked at. If they looked at these case notes and they were like, "Ugh, what a mess. We need to open up a case." Sled. I hope you were looking into the people that were making the notes. Sorry. Like I said before, one of them goes on and they're in documentaries and whatnot. You know, I always thought Steven was murdered and nobody would help and this and that. But it's hard to tell. It's hard to tell. Why didn't you come forward sooner? Why did you come forward after you found out that Alex Murdaugh stole from you? So then you're at like is he lying because he stole from him and he's mad at him and he wants this extra negative attention on him? Or Did he know the whole time? And the only reason that he's speaking up is because he found out that he's a scumbag that stole from him. You know what I mean? Where were you all this time? It's interesting to me. I can't imagine I can't imagine having to still argue with people, um, and it still just seems so secretive, and I think that their history has shown that the longer that they're left just in secret to do whatever it is that they're doing, the less accountability and the longer this drags on. It needs to be public now. Shit. You all have had 8 years to figure this out in private, sorry. That's a long ass time. I don't know. What are you guys thinking? We're gonna keep this short because I it's easier to listen to smaller segments. We can have time for when everybody comes up. But, I wanna know about the door handle. I wanna know why his body was moved and how it was moved, and especially I wanna know how and why it was moved when I have someone telling me he was wearing a totally different shirt than what you carted him off wearing and gave over for evidence. I wanna know why some people are saying that they picked up evidence like the phone and it didn't have a chain of custody form with it, but in the case file is a chain of custody form with that person's signature on it. Did someone go in and fuck with the chain of custody forms? Because that's a big problem. I wanna know who he's swimming with that night, if he actually was swimming. I wanna know if he actually run out of gas. I wanna know why that fucking car handle is missing. So bizarre. I wanna know how it looks like there's, like, smeared fingerprints, bloody fingerprints on his pants. I wanna know how he was walking with no light. There's many things that I wanna know, and I don't think that it's gonna end just, like, with this new determination to, like, pacify everyone. Do you all think after 8 years of keeping this this secret. Let's say that there are 5 or 6. I mean, he was very specific that Keel thinks that there are 5 or 6 people that know what happened to Stephen and can give information that will lead to their arrest. Do you all think that 8 years and a Murdaugh in jail, prison, and some Murdaugh's deceased, and a $35,000 reward, do you think that's gonna be enough to drag, like, whatever cockroaches have been hiding in the shadows for the last 8 years, knowing what happened, to come forward? Are they alive still? We'll see. Talking about it, talking about what doesn't make sense, trying to get answers. I think some of them are gonna come from investigators and not people. Clearly, it's not gonna go away. This. Everybody had a hand. It doesn't, like, go on this long, get this far, stay this quiet. I mean, let's be real. If that letter is true and you didn't follow up with this person who said that they witnessed his murder, that's a problem. I feel like you should go to jail. If that ends up being true, I feel like you should go to jail. I feel like how is that any different than your uncle or somebody you know, your friend, your best friend, somebody coming to you and saying that they killed somebody and you don't go tell the police? What do they call that? So we're gonna keep going through this stuff and trying to make some sense of it. And if anything, if we don't find things that make sense, at least the questions that need to be answered to be out there. Because this is like not going to be enough. It's not enough just to get the death certificate changed. I'm sorry. It might be for Sandy, and I feel terrible for her. Health wise, I'm surprised and grateful that she was able to go this long, you know? But for other people and other families and other kids and other moms, wherever the accountability has to go, it needs to go. Hopefully, the new autopsy is done soon. They said that they were able to do a full and complete autopsy. I love that lady with the white hair. I like her voice. She said they were able to do a full and complete autopsy just as if it was the day that they were doing his first forensic autopsy. The only thing that they didn't get to do was toxicology, which really doesn't matter because they at least did that and it was negative for everything. So, but you have to think about where evidence should have been collected from that like isn't going to be able to anymore. So for example, the car that's gone. Yes, Dupree. Yeah, I like her. I can't ever tell if I'm watching a new interview because she says the same thing to all of the people that are interviewing her. We were able to perform a full and complete forensic autopsy on Stephen, but she's great. We'll come back. Keep an eye out for the autopsy, the new autopsy, and don't stop talking about Stephen. Katie, you're late. We're leaving. Love you. Bye.